Welcome and thank you for tuning in to this podcast where I'm going to be talking to Mahmood Aziz. So, Mahmood, I'm just going to introduce you before bringing you in a little bit more, if that's okay. He's the founder of Mind Intelligence, helping companies in the SaaS space to scale, to go from 10K a month to 100K a month or more. As a fractional executive, he provides strategic and operational guidance to SaaS and IT service organizations that want to achieve sustainable growth, prepare for their next fundraise and exceed their potential. He works with founders, directors, and boards to attain, identify, and close the growth gaps in their business using a strategic, operational, and customer-centric approach. Wow. Welcome, Mahmood. How are you?
I'm very well, Kim, and thank you for such a wonderful introduction. It is a mouthful, and it probably, as we talk through stuff, it'll probably make more sense than the words on the page, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this is what I want people to be able to understand is how people have arrived where they are and the story that they have to tell, because every one of us has got a story, and the whole podcast is about understanding those stories and what they learnt on their journey. So it sounds to me like you've got quite a lot to share. So I'm gonna have to pack it all in, I think.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it is interesting. I think one of the things I learned very late on in life throughout the course of my thing is that it's the stories that make people and organizations work with each other. We can put all we want about the kind of wonderful things we do, or the service or the product or whatever it is we're doing, but the stories bring it to life, and then we can connect in different ways.
And I have to say, we spoke last week, I think, and you shared two stories there, and they were great stories, I have to say. I should have recorded them, but I'll have to write them as best I can for my story theme.
Lovely. I'll be happy to talk about them again if you could remind me what they were.
Well, maybe we'll see how we go through this and
Sure.
cover them. But your storytelling was brilliant, because I was completely enthralled. Have
Thank
always
you.
loved stories. So let's start with the first and most important story is your journey to date, how you've come to where you are.
It's really interesting. If I look back on life and work, because they're intertwined, right? As a young boy, my head was in the clouds. I was always, interested in what was beyond the stars, science fiction, I suppose. Growing up as a child of the baby boomers, we had lots of things that were tied to imagination, because we didn't have all the things we have today that consume our time. So our brains and comics and books or periodicals, whatever you want to call it, was what we did. So I suppose we are of a similar kind of generation where that storytelling or engagement with stories was really important in the beginning.
Yes.
And whilst I had friends, I was also the son of first generation immigrants. And so that story, comes out in different ways throughout life. Because there's a couple of things I've realized, that because of being first generation immigrants and being here at a young age, meant that I went through lots of changes of identity.
Oh,
so
really?
that changes of identity also was about, what happens at work. Because again, you kind of think who you are, what you're doing. And the Japanese have a, really interesting belief. And they believe that we all have three faces, right? The face that we show to the outside world and is our kind of public persona. The face that we show to our nearest and dearest, family and friends, who see a different side of us, both the good and the bad. And then we have a third face, the one that we only keep to ourselves and never comes out.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, actually.
Yeah.
I was having a conversation with somebody, and I was talking about something, and I said, nobody really knows me completely, because it depends on who I'm with as to, what I'm presenting. So it's really interesting, isn't it?
And you can take some of that from example. You may be really happy and jolly with the people at work, but inside you're a seething mass. As soon as you see friends and family who are most nearer to you, you can vent quite happily, right? And you're kind of chalk and cheese between how your outside persona is with what you're doing with your nearest and dearest.
Yes, a valid point.
Because we feel more vulnerable, I think, or more open to let our deeper feelings come out. But anyway, being that immigration, so the first thing was imagination and kind of, what's out there. And that has led to me always being interested in that kind of what's the art of the possible. And the art of the possible married to especially technology. Because, when you're a boy and you're 11, 12, and you're looking at all the things on TV at the time, whether it's UFOs, Space 1999, $6 Million Man, and
Loved
other
all
things that
those.
we remember, right? And it's always, oh, look at this gizmo, look at that gadget, look at that, spaceship or whatever. And Doctor Who was massive as well at the time. So we had all these things around how our imagination works and being guided. But that led to a deep interest in technology, from a gadget point of view, I suppose, not from an application point of view. And I think we'll come back to that later. So those are kind of my first thing, that was getting into books and reading voraciously. So throughout school, and I didn't really know, going back to that issue around identity, I didn't really know what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And all, unfortunately, because my parents were not familiar with everything that was going on around them in terms of how to coach children or pass on some wisdom, they passed on the kind of wisdom they had from their elders and generations.
And that's normal, isn't it? They're going to teach what they know, not necessarily what they don't know, because it was, well, for you particularly, as first generational, it's a whole new world, all of it.
Definitely, right?
Absolutely.
It wasn't, right? Because I was a very young boy, therefore all I knew was what Britain provided me, or England provided me, where I was growing up, firstly in London, and then when we moved out further north, to where I am today, in Luton, it was normal for me because I was 4 or 5 years old, and that's different, right? You kind of forget everything quite quickly, and children are very resilient. And I'd like to tell an interesting story about that. Well, I'll link back to business and children, so please remind me if I forget.
Business and children.
Yeah. So the other piece that happened is that I originally, and probably because my eldest cousin, who was also here at the time, applied to and got accepted to medicine, I kind of thought, well, maybe I should have a go at that. But I didn't do anything around it. So here's an interesting lesson that I think children of today, people of today, have got advantages that we never had back then. And the first one is, there are so many people giving their wisdom freely in all sorts of channels, and we can find out anything about anything and anybody in any function, any role, any job, any career, and have people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people around the world share their wisdom on how they did it, a bit like we're talking about now.
Yeah, I guess am I just about to learn a lesson?
I don't know, right? And hopefully it helps people. But the story I've got is that very much because I didn't know what I didn't know, therefore I went blindly doing what I did, and career guidance at school wasn't the best. But I think, the fact we have the sum total of the world's knowledge at our fingertips and able to engage with people at all levels really quickly with almost instantaneous responses, rather than relying on snail mail or traveling to various institutions around the country, means that we've got great ways of filling our knowledge gaps that we didn't have back then.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I think you're right when you talk about the fact that you didn't know what you didn't know. And I think right up until, for many people, into their mid to late 20s, they may not know. In fact, I was a slow learner and I still didn't know when I got to my 50s and what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And there's this great expectation of knowing what you're going to do. And one of the tips I heard from a trainer of mine, he said he was a bit like that. He was all over the place. He did this and he did a little bit of that and moved on. And he said, sometimes that's your journey.
Yeah. So, that was the first of my learning points. We talk about, journeys. I learned that I could fail at something. And actually, it wasn't a bad thing.
What did you fail at? Sorry, I've missed that. Did you?
I failed to get into medical school.
Right? Okay, right.
It's in a way, here's something I want to do. I don't get it. I haven't met the expectation, or that, there's a gap or something else. And I kind of looked around. I thought, what do I do now? And I actually spent a gap year before university and worked. Fortunately, I was in the era of nepotism really helps. So dad had already, when I was 16, got me a summer job for a couple of weeks where he worked. And this is the other part of my journey. So we talked about imagination. So the other part of my journey Dad worked for Thomson Holidays. For those of you who don't know, Thomson Holidays is now TUI. So one of the big travel operators,
Yes.
doing kind of package holidays. Now, growing up, every year, because of where he worked, what he did, his level, we were able to go abroad for holiday. So whilst my mates were going off to, you know, kind of Swanage, Bognor, Scarborough, Harrogate, and all these other fantastic places, or France for camping, which, you know, some of them did, most people couldn't afford to jet off to somewhere. So the other plank of kind of, you know, the basis of what makes me me, and where I got to and how I got there, was travel. Because travel was, I think, a much better education than actual school was. And I'm going to maybe say something controversial to lots of people, but I reckon for most of us, 90 odd percent, 99% of the population, we've learned all we need to know by the age of 11. Everything else we do after that is unnecessary, potentially.
Really?
Right? There are certain things that if you look at your daily life, right, if you can add up, you can spell, you can ride, you can speak, you can talk, you know, most of us don't use grammar properly or punctuation properly. So for the people that matter and the other skills that matter, i.e. specialist expert knowledge, to be the doctor or to be the engineer or to be the nuclear scientist or the space, you know, we do additional training after we come out of university.
Yes.
So if you look at education, most of the things we need to actually be practical, useful people, the stuff we learn between 11 and 21 probably doesn't matter, because I don't use any of it today. And that's the piece I'm
That is going to
controversial,
stir a little bit of a comment, I'm sure.
right? I look forward to it, and people to kind of go, yeah. But you know, we've got to have some good views about it. And I actually think, even today, and the journey that we've got to, and why I'm where I'm today. But it doesn't, going back to travel, right? So travel was about meeting different people, different circumstances in different countries. And it was the first step to, oh, I've got more gaps in my persona, knowledge, experience, all the rest of it. Because when you go abroad, you're in a different country, different set of behaviors and customs and languages, and you know, people react differently. They've got different emotions or show different emotions.
Yeah.
So
How
many
old
things.
were you when you were doing this? Sorry to interrupt. How old were you?
So we started, my first holiday was around 4.5. I went to, my dad took me to Mallorca. I still
Right,
remember
okay.
all the holidays we took, right? I could probably rattle them off, but
Yeah, let's not.
by the age of 21 or 22, maybe a bit older, I've been to about 20 odd countries.
Well, and you know, that's amazing, isn't it? Because you would have been exposed to so much of a variety of how other people live.
And it wasn't just about the, you know, because obviously, like kids, when you're kids, you make friends with anybody,
You
even
do.
if you can't speak the language, right? So you'd be in the pool, splashing, laughing, and there'd be people from Germany or Spain or from Scandinavia, France, whatever. The point being that you were exposed not only to the Brits, right, who were plenty still, but you were with other people. You don't get that all the time, right? It's one of the things that helped me, and I think, you know, but it's also the kind of relationships you have. So it wasn't all beach holidays. There were city holidays. There were a couple of coach tours as well. And of course, you know, we did the typical thing of going to excursions. So you go for a day trip here, you go see some historical sites, you learn a bit more about the history of the place, and trying to get more into what's going on with these people, where they come from. And, you know, there are some amazing, the place we went to mostly were the Mediterranean, right? Because that's where Thomson was focused on at the time. And over the years, as they got bigger and started going elsewhere, then some of the locations became a bit more exotic.
Okay.
And if I were to pick 3 or 4 memories, right, out of those travels and the people. So the first one is seeing Hollywood and Vine in Los Angeles at the age of 15. Right, so the kind of culture, the place where stuff happened, the Capitol Records building, you know, where music's made and delivered, and seeing Disneyland and stuff like that. Right, so that was, you know, as a kid, what more could you want, right? By that time, I'd already been to a whole bunch of places in Europe that were quite interesting. We did 11-country tour when I was about 14 across Central Europe, and seeing the Olympic villages at Innsbruck, and the ski jump. But Hollywood and Vine, right? Wow, I'm at the center of pop culture.
Definitely.
The next one was the Great Pyramid of Giza, and being inside the internal chamber, the main chamber, and looking up and thinking, how the hell am I not being crushed by these massive 26-ton blocks, of which there are 50 odd, right? And there's not a single piece of mortar or cement between them.
It's amazing and incredible. I watched lots of programs on that. Were you allowed in it? I didn't think you were.
Yeah. So back in before it, so back then, right? So, and I've been recently. We went last year. Took my boys and wife to see it. They went for the first time. But back then, in the 80s, it was still 45-minute drive from Cairo, and most of
Right.
it was still open. There wasn't the hubbub and build
Mm.
up that you have today. So I was fortunate to see at a time when it was still fairly pristine. It looked a bit like the, you know, Death on the Nile type stuff what Kenneth Branagh did last year, whatever, you know, kind of open and less people. So you could climb in, you could walk in. Now you have to pay to go in,
Yeah.
right? So, and they limit the number of people, so you can still go in. And we went into some of the other chambers as well in one of the other pyramids this time. But that 50 odd tons, when the guide's telling you you're standing below 50 odd 26-ton blocks of stone, and there's no cement or mortar, and they've been that way for 5,000 years, and you kind of go, wow, do I not know anything? I feel really tiny, right?
Yeah. I understand
And
that.
the majesty.
What did
And
you
then
take away from that then? Just the idea that, you know, actually we're just but a dot on the landscape, really.
I think for me, it was more about that they've got a sense of history and belonging that I didn't yet connect to.
Okay.
That was the biggest thing at that time. You know, looking back on it, I didn't know it at the time, but I'm looking back and thinking, wow, they've got this connection going back 5,000 years, and here I am, a wanderer type person, neither in one camp nor the other,
Yeah.
because I was a product of two different cultures. And you know, parents being parents are always worried about their kids, so there was always, are we going to turn into, you know, young English people as opposed, and forget all the culture and religion behind us?
Yes.
And that also is something I think that, as a lesson to somebody, is that those childhood stuff around that your parents give you about taking risks. My parents were very risk averse, and had they not been so risk averse, or I had a different personality, I might have done entrepreneurship much earlier than now.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I think we're a product of our generation. I think all our parents, most of them, not all of them, but most parents were risk averse because they were almost from the war
Correct.
type thing, that whole war situation they would have been tarnished with. And of course, there it was about, you know, being risk averse in every way you can because you just don't know how long it's going to be there.
Yeah, and not only that, you know, they'd been through rations. I think when my dad first came, they were still rationing of certain
Yes.
things in the
Okay.
60s and so on. So yeah, all these factors, and so that imagination, the travel, and then you've got this risk averseness because of the clash of cultures as well. But that identity issue we talked about at the beginning was also interesting because product of two cultures. You know, I liked things from their childhood and our
Mm.
culture, being from Pakistan. But I was, you know, glued to Thursday nights, Top of the Pops, and so on, etc. Right, and fashions or whatnot, or lack of it in my case,
Yeah.
as you grew up. So I think those three things, right, and then the fourth thing was obviously the risk averseness. And the last memory, so the pyramids, and the last memory is sitting on a houseboat, on the back of it, the same one that Charlton Heston stayed in, on Lake Dal, if I pronounce it correctly, in Srinagar, which is in the northern Hindu Kush, right, the base
All
of the
right.
Himalayas. So that was kind of the childhood last big holiday, one of the last big holidays we did.
Mm.
It was a combined trip to Russia and India, which is again amazing, fascinating stuff. And to be part of, you know, seeing the Taj Mahal was another highlight on that same trip. So those are some of the things travel gave me to kind of look at these wonderful things, beautiful nature, meeting different people. But
Sounds
the whole
amazing.
point of being more empathetic and open when somebody's different. And that's a big part of, you know, if we're going to work with people as entrepreneurs, we're going to come across so many different people. And you've got to be accepting of how people are, as well as giving what you're trying to help them with.
Yes. Yeah, because they're very
open-minded.
different, aren't they? They've all got their own little foibles, or we have all got our own little foibles,
We all
ways
do.
of working, things that we like and things we don't. Yeah, and being able to work that's very flexible. When I was learning neurolinguistic programming, for those out there who are familiar with that, I don't know whether you are, Mahmood, but the idea, one of the things there is that the person who has more flexibility of behavior has a better way of managing the relationship than somebody who doesn't. So because you're able to move with them, so you build relationships much faster.
Yeah. But you know, the whole experience of working with different people over time starts moving in that direction anyway. So it's not something you can't learn.
Exactly.
And that's an important thing, right? Obviously, when you're younger, some things are easier to learn, but also when you're younger, some things are more fixed and get difficult to get rid of when you're older.
Yeah.
I've certainly learned that the hard way as well. So I
Mm.
think, you know, those are the, so we've talked about travel, we've talked about failure, we've talked about kind of context and contact with who I was or wasn't.
Yeah.
And then because Dad worked in a certain role in Thompson's, he was working in finance, he was accountancy, and he tried to do accounting as well. I kind of decided, well, I can't get into medicine, so I ended up going to university to do accounting and finance.
Okay. Yeah.
So here it was, switched from science to kind of more mathematics. I enjoyed maths. And one of the really lovely stories I've got that my sister hates me for, so if you're watching the timer, sorry, I'm going to tell the story, is that I enjoyed maths so much at school. And my sisters, all younger than me, three of them, and they all went to the same school afterwards or at the same time. And some of them had the same teachers. So, of course, what happens? My younger sister goes to school, ends up in her fourth and fifth years, and gets my old maths teacher. So for 2 years, not only does she have to sit in the same math class, she was actually at my desk because apparently I'd scribed underneath Mahmood Aziz.
Who didn't?
We didn't, right? But then I had to listen to 2 years of, Simon, why can't you be more like your brother? He was so good at maths.
Oh, that comparison expectation. I'm with her. How awful. Not that I had that, but I know my children did. And there was a high expectation on the second one coming through. And she was never meant to go through an education system, that girl.
Well,
Go out and start working as soon as you could. So
yeah.
it was quite interesting when you were talking about 11, you think, we're pretty much learned. I always thought it was 14. And
Is
she
it? Okay.
just go out to work and do work.
I think there's so if I could clarify, if I may,
Yes.
when I say it's the knowledge we've learned till 11, not our maturity and our emotional
Oh, good.
intelligence,
Absolutely.
right? So I think, it's the topics or the subject matter that, you can kind of say between 11, look, if you go back, right? And we were taught Euclidean geometry. I don't know how many people are still aware of it, but we were taught Euclidean geometry, which is you go back and learn theorems about how things work in maths, but you also have to go back to first principles and prove the theorem.
Oh, well, I
Not
don't
only
think.
did you have to know the theorem, you had to prove the theorem to go with it in maths. And it was like, but that's maybe, I have to say, maybe consciously or unconsciously, I might take that piece back, right? But that piece is about when we look at when things happen. One of the things in business, we look to solutions to something because we're reacting to a problem or situation, rather than we don't take time because we don't believe we've got time. It's another mental problem we've got. And one of the things we have to learn as you grow older with the wisdom we've got, or lessons, life lessons. But if you can go back and figure out, right, what's causing the situation to arise. And in fact, in our joint BBB groups, right, a lot of stuff, some of the things we've been talking about recently have been about why did it happen in the first place?
Yes.
And some of the things I've learned, especially around if you can start to question why. And this is something that is drummed out of us at school, unfortunately. Now, for those of us with kids, grandkids, and whatever, you will remember our 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, if your memory's good, right? But one of the things they do at that age, constantly questioning, asking, toddlers and up to 5, they believe, and this goes back to the thing about business and organizations, right? There's a great parallel here. That age group believes they are the universe. Everything revolves around them.
You mean that doesn't hold true when you grow up?
Here's the
You mean?
lesson for businesses. Here's the lessons for all businesses.
Hmm.
We go outwards and think about our work and our business as being the center of what we do. Predominantly because we've been fed mostly a diet of adverts and so on, talking about products, right? Buy this, get that. You know, that's the exchange you get. Whereas when we look at how we're trying to do things in the areas we are, solopreneurs, smaller businesses, scaling businesses, if you don't have an understanding of what your customer is about, what they're trying to achieve, but more importantly, what they want to do for their customer, right? That's where children are parallel to organizations. We believe very early stages, as we're growing and creating our work and our products and services, that what we sell, what we do is the important thing. But it's not. The important thing is, how do your customers get value in the value chain from what you provide? Because you are one cog in what they do. And for them, what's important is, how does it allow them to make their customers happier? So when thinking about what we do for people and organizations that we work with, if you can spend time to not only understand what your customers want, what they're trying to achieve in this particular issue, because it could be, you know, you're providing a point solution. You're giving them something that solves an immediate problem or need. However, if you are curious, and one of the things that we have to do as solopreneurs and smaller businesses is sell. And most people hate selling. But if you can treat sales as more about discovery and questioning, to say, how do I help you? What can I uncover? What's the real problem at play here that's causing the issue? Going back to this root cause analysis type thinking, then it means you're able to work better with whoever you're working with, because you're understanding them a bit deeper than kind of the immediate need.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the salespeople, if you can spend the extra time uncovering a bit further than just, okay, you know, it's different if you're buying a widget. Well, most of us that we're on this podcast today probably are business to business. Some of us may be business to consumer, some of it applies. But B2B businesses, we're trying to figure out what those businesses are trying to achieve and how they need help, where they need help. Can we provide it? And in what way can we provide it? And Rudyard Kipling's, you know, 6 stalwart friends, I'm going to mismatch the whole poem, whatever. But if you go back and rather than think about the complex stuff that we put in terms of our terminology, our language, our vertical sector knowledge and experience, or the industry we're in, and the jargon we put around it. But actually, most of the things that we do as business to business people can be answered with who, what, where, why, when, and how.
Yes. Yeah. It's a very common one, isn't it, to start using that. And when I'm talking about questioning, it's very much about that. Less the why when you're talking about somebody individually, but when you're talking about the business. So when you think about you obviously went to university, did you say, to do the accountancy and finance? So what were the key markers then that's led you to where you are now? The inflection points that meant you learned new stuff.
So the first one was, again, I subconsciously was not happy with my choice of degree. I was doing it for something to do.
Well, right? Yeah, okay, I understand that.
Right. And being an accountant wasn't, you know, accountant, yeah, as you know, right. And I spent many years with, and many of my good friends, right, obviously university friends and people I work with today and the companies I've worked with in the past. So if you're out there, any accountants, this isn't meant to say anything about you in general, but I subconsciously wasn't ready for it. And I think what happened was I did really well up until it came to finals. And then in finals, the period leading up to finals, I ended up in some funk fugue state. And instead of revising, I went into kind of, you know, some kind of mode where it was like, I can't be bothered. I couldn't find the link to motivate me to say, I had a job, right? I had an offer of a job. All I had to get was to get a 2-2. And I'll be working with one of the top, you know, 50 accounting firms somewhere in central London. And Didn't happen. So
You took your foot off the pedal.
I took my foot off the pedal, took my eye off the ball, and all the rest of it. So that was my second failure, right?
Bless you.
Right. And they didn't stop me, because I then went back. I took a year out. I worked again, worked in multiple places. I worked for Granada Services, went to Toddington Service Station every day for about 3 months, handling loads of cash every day, because I was doing the cashing up. And we'd spend all day counting money. 4 of us in a team, and a manager and a supervisor, locked in a room in the middle of the service station, and lunch in the cafe. And it was a really interesting, surreal experience. I was handling all this money. Now, many of us, when faced with thousands of pounds of cash in front of us at that time, as a 21-year-old, right? It's
It's amazing.
Should I take some home, right? But for those 12 weeks, I made sure that I wasn't tempted. So I resisted. The reconciliations all added up. What we counted was banked, and so on, and what we married up to the tills. And very infrequently we had £1 or £2 out or whatever. But that was another interesting experience, that I was entrusted with kind of counting this cash.
You're a grown-up.
But it also got me to the point where, cash, okay, it didn't matter handling it. And working at Thompson's also as part of a team where every 2 weeks that department paid out £100 million to hoteliers around the globe. So numbers and money didn't make any odds to me. Whereas for some people, right, in those days, if you had a tenner, that was huge amounts of money. So, right, what did I do? I then spent 6 months working. I went out to loads of people around, contacted many people, was tenacious, was determined. And I ended up getting a role with a firm called Ernst & Winnie, locally. Met the partner. He said, doesn't matter what you got in a degree, tell me about yourself. What do you like doing? And kind of just had a chat. And I think
a bit forward thinking, isn't it?
I was a bit open. I was me, because I thought, what have I got to lose, kind of stuff. And that made me realize, well, actually, people are out there and will give you a helping hand when you ask for it. And I said, Chris, I know I'm probably not worthy, right? They were one of the big 8 at the time, right? Ernst & Winnie were one of the big 8 accounting firms, and the local branch. And he said, well, you've grown up local. I like what you're saying. You've got the kind of attributes. You're not stupid. You've had various things happen, but you're still here. So he saw something in me and gave me a chance. And I think that's the other thing that, we all too frequently miss. We don't ask for help, but we need it. And that's something as businesses we definitely need to go out and do. Right. And I've said it to you before we came on the podcast about certain things I'm struggling with. And I've struggled with it for 3 or 4 months. And in the end, I'm going, it's been stupid, right? Just ask people. So I've now started asking, what can we do about it? And what you'll find when you do start asking, people are generally, all around the world, very willing to help.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've got this fear of asking, and the fear can be real or not, but the fear is that you might be rejected,
Yes,
stupid, you're daft, whatever it is. And none of it's real. And you're absolutely right. Just by asking, people love to help other people. They like to feel valued, or that they've contributed in some way and, help somebody up on their journey. Admittedly, you'll always find 1 or 2 are not, but the majority of people are only too willing to help you out. And I think that is really quite valuable for me, as you've said it here. So thank you.
Yeah. And, the thing is, reaching out to both of us, I know how you are. So, I'll say, if people want to reach out to Kim, she'll willingly lend an ear and then figure out what to do from there. And same with me, I don't kind of say to people, my time is so valuable that I won't even talk to you. So for those of you listening, if you do want to reach out to either of us, then, give us a message. My details are there. You can book a initial, kind of conversation. I think for both of us, we've got some links that allow us to kind of book some time. So happy to have conversations with no obligation, right? Because at the end of the day, I do still want to have a passion. We just got to turn around to say, well, what makes it work? At the end of the day, what makes it valuable for both of us?
And of course, when they reach out to you, you'll be talking about the SaaS element and business growth and that side of things. Is that right?
Definitely. I mean, there's lots of stuff. But actually, I like with all of us, There are lots of businesses I've worked with in the past, and this is what I'm coming to, right? So I'm going to give you another inflection point. So the other inflection point was, guess what? When it came to doing the professional exams, I never qualified. So after 4.5 years of working in auditing, I kind of moved on from EY, which had become Ernst & Young, had merged with Arthur Young, and became Ernst & Young, which is now EY. So 4.5 years, learned lots of interesting lessons, went out and did stuff, but was a part qualified accountant. And then it was like back in the wide world. Bugger, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And this is another inflection point that I realized that if we sit still and are complacent, as Einstein said, right? If you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, it ain't going to work.
Yeah.
So for those of you who've been trying doing things, there is no substitute for change. And this is one of the hardest things that people have trouble with. We've both worked in corporate careers where we've worked a lot with and around organizations in a state of change. But really, one of the things that came back, and I'm now finding that actually I did learn something between 11 and 18 that I remember. Bugger. My whole theory goes to pot here, right? But I don't know if you come across or remember the concept of entropy.
Yes.
And for those of you who don't know,
so it's part of the chaos theory, isn't it, as well?
entropy,
when things just die, basically.
No, it was slightly different. So, and forgive the chemists out there where I learned it from. So, Mr. Crapnell, thank you very much for this. Back at sixth
Thank
form.
you, Mr. Crapnell.
Entropy is that the universe is in a state always moving towards chaos.
Okay, yeah, that's
right.
That's probably
and what we try and do as humans, because we can't deal with chaos that well, and we have to create, the rational part of our brain has to create some order or structure, which is why we have societies and organizations and companies and rules and all the rest of it, right? We're trying to make sense of the chaos.
We are.
But in reality, everything is moving to chaos, which means it's ever changing. And it's something we don't realize or fix in and say, regardless of what happens, I am going to change. Things around me are going to change. I shouldn't expect it to stay the same. When I was growing up, I had hair. Who'd have thought at a certain age, right? I should have guessed it. My dad was bald, but not the point. I always thought I was going to have hair till I died, right? And then when it happened, I should have been surprised. But we as businesses and as people, for some reason, we're not good with dealing with change. Some change is really small, takes a long time, but it happens. Other things are the incremental stuff that happen really quickly, for which typically we're unprepared, right? The client says, thank you very much. I've had enough of working with you. Don't want you anymore. And it's the biggest client you got. And you think, bugger, what am I going to do? Where do I replace that kind of?
Yeah.
Whereas, if you look at why bigger companies tend to be more resilient, is because they've systemized, they've thought about it, they've got processes, they have specialized it with different people, but they also do some kind of what if kind of thinking. When you're a young company, we believe we don't have the luxury to do what if kind of thinking and do some kind of scenarios or planning or budgeting or whatever. We kind of think this way, the railroad is straight, it's going to keep on going that way and everything's hunky-dory. But that's also one of the other things as humans we've got, well, it depends. Most of us in business, if you're not in business, you're an optimist, right? You wouldn't be doing it if you didn't have a purpose and a passion and getting somewhere.
Yes.
And therefore, we believe things are going to go well. And when they don't go well, it's not that we don't know what to do. It's we're juggling so many things at one time that we may not have this as a priority. And so working with external people is somewhat like going back and saying, having an additional person to provide that sounding board, maybe, right? We act as mentors as well as coaches. We don't just kind of do work on a transactional basis. I do work on an advisory kind of thing. We worked on, for I've got a question. We can work on kind of retainers that kind of allow us to be available when needed. We're not invasive, right? We're not there telling you that you have to do this. But equally, when you tell us we need to get X done, then we're providing routes to finding ways that make what you're trying to solve doable. And I
And that's
think it's
that inner
marrying,
curiosity that you had earlier on, that you as a child, that, that brings the what if, and
yeah,
that can, I mean, that the what if can be the negative part, but it can also be the positive what if.
right, right.
Wow. And then you can start looking,
But we
more
could also be,
interesting.
when we need to be, we can be, not to, not to say negative connotations around it, but though, are you bloody serious about doing this? Are you
Yeah.
sure? Right. And the whole, we try not to bring the disbelief into our voice, but it's, people have some weird and wonderful ideas, right? And you've got to sit there go, it's great to be innovative and pushing the envelope and all the rest of it. But what, over time, what we learn is, when should you do that is as important as doing it in the first place. So I've got nothing against people having really grandiose plans. A few years ago, I made a friend in the gym, just chatting, and he said, I said, well, yeah, young man in his mid-30s at the time. And he said to me, I said, what do you do? He said, I'm working in this, I work in social care, I've got some businesses, my family back home, I've got some land, whatever. Very interesting. What do you want to do? He says, well, I want to be the prime minister or the president of Bangladesh. Now, I didn't laugh. What a great,
High
I actually
expectation.
thought, what a very high vision, right?
Mm.
But over the years, and I'm still in touch with him, right? But over the years, he's tempered it, because what he realized was, there are certain things, systems and behaviors and levels of influence that are in place that are very hard to dislodge. So it's a bit like, realizing that you're going up against, in effect, at that level, the universe, and it may be really difficult to get there in the way that he wanted in the time frame. So change his thought processes, change his thing. But I didn't laugh at him for having that vision. I was kind of curious as to what made him suitable, and encouraged him to talk about it, rather than, a lot of times we stifle creativity because we dismiss things out of hand rather than exploring what might be possible.
That's so true, and we do it from a very young age with our younger people, don't we? We poo-poo it, we mock it, you're not going to be able to do that, whatever. So is this an example then of where you're helping people to shine? You're coming in, you're being curious, you're asking the what if questions, and you're taking them on their own journey in the first place, I guess, in their heads, isn't it, really?
Somewhat, right? Depends what they're after, like with everybody, right?
Mm.
Normally for people, we are either providing a immediate something,
Mm.
I need to solve or resolve this issue, problem, whatever, or we're helping them to guide and think about possible solutions to figure out which one's best for them, given the resources they have at their disposal, what they're prepared to put into in terms of working with people like us and others.
Mm.
Uh, but other times we need to prod, right? And one of the things is that most people, despite the availability of all the information we talked about earlier, still don't know where to start, where to go. And
Right.
to think about and saying, is the first step, I don't know what I don't know? Or am I still so, confident about my own abilities that I can do what I need to do? Goes back to the point about how you are as a person. And there's
Mm.
nothing wrong with either one of those, and all the in-between states and many more behind. But I think where I look at how I want to bring it, there's actually practical stuff that says, okay, when you're working at a certain level,
Yeah.
you've learned quite a lot already. And what the idea of what I believe I bring is how to help people evolve. It's not revolution, because people think change is revolution. It's not. Evolution is, can I do a little bit better than I did yesterday? Can I do
Oh,
a little bit
yes.
better next week than I did this week?
Those marginal gains we were talking about.
Somewhat, right? It's the compounding effect. So if the analogy is, if you
Yes.
look at compounding on your money, if you leave it in, some kind of compounding interest account,
Mm-hmm.
the same principle applies with what you do in your business. And if you start to compound the changes in your business, 3 or 4 things happen. Number one is not seen as radical, right? It's not seen as something that's going to totally change what people are doing already. It goes back to that fear of change,
Mm.
right? And it allows people to bring things in at their pace. And if you can bring things at your pace, then you're more confident and motivated to make it happen. Whereas if you're told you've got to do this, what's the first reaction we got when someone tells you what to do?
I've
Right?
never been good at being told what to do.
Many of us aren't, right? Many of us aren't. And therefore, it's about, okay, that's the first one, resistance to change. Second one, it's about exploring that creativity, because we're bringing outside thinking. We're bringing our experiences, the stories we're sharing today, for example, things like that, and saying, does that help with thinking about what you're doing? And that's the other one, right? When you talk to people, they have a set of frameworks and mental models that they've grown up with and are using to put against whatever situation they're in right now.
Right.
And what we need to do as people with our experiences from outside elsewhere is say, how do we help you shift those mental models and frameworks? Some of it may be, what do you think about when you start doing this stuff? For many people, when you say, what would you like to do? The first thing that they look at is what I call solutionizing. They're trying to figure out and say, how do I answer the problem that I think is the problem?
And that comes back nicely to what you were saying earlier with Einstein. You really need to understand what the real problem is, not what you think the problem is.
So you need to go back and define,
You do.
right? And saying, what's causing us to have this issue? But equally, what bit can I actually do something about? And this is the other piece that is really important for people and businesses. We're only in control of the bits we're in control of. And when you're working in business to business and everything else, there are so many factors and things that we've got no control over, right? We can't change anything about how quickly the government introduces legislation or laws that make us do something.
Exactly.
Right? For the four buggers who've got, trading businesses and trying to do things post-Brexit, I salute you, because, going from quite easy ways of doing things to many onerous things they never had to do before and they weren't prepared for, even today, right? We're kind of, 2 years after it? I can't remember how long it is, but we're still going through those. So, political, societal, environmental factors, can't do anything about. So one of the important things is also to help people recognize what are the levers you can use to change things. George was talking the other day about, in our content sessions, about what are the 3 things we can change.
Yes.
Right? At a small business. When you get to a slightly bigger business, there's maybe 7 or 8 things that you could change or control or have levers over. Right? And therefore, it's also recognizing and saying, okay, what can I do and where should I do it? And the last part about working with people and thinking about, it's actually that practical, been there, done it, scars, t-shirt.
Yes.
Hope to write a book one day, maybe. But these stories, going back and saying, well, so we can provide the lessons or the journeys that we've been through that may or may not help you. At the end of the day, all we can do is share that experience, give our practical examples of what we've done in the past to deal with situations. Then it's up to the people who are our clients and customers saying, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'd like to use this, but not that. And then it's your job to say, well, how do we make that work? And I think, we've also got to learn, both as people sharing our expertise with other businesses, but for those businesses that are our clients, we've also got to learn and temper what we think is best for somebody with what is actually the client or the people are able to do about it. And we've got to accept people's limitations. And that is a really interesting thing, right? We've all got limits.
How do you know that? Because do you ask them what their limitations are? I mean, I know you said earlier that you would ask them, are you sure about this? Because I absolutely hear what you've been saying there, Mahmood, but they've got to be willing to sacrifice something, be it their time or, what they're doing. There is a sacrifice to going for what they really want and moving forward. And it could be a good sacrifice or it might be a painful one. It doesn't matter, but they've really got to put the effort in and commit to it 100%.
It's a fantastic point, Kim, right? The whole piece around understanding that when we do whatever we're saying we're going to do, how committed is that person to achieving, not doing the work, but have you engaged with the motivation behind what they're trying to do?
Yeah.
And therefore, when you talk about, this issue about limits, people may not know their limits, but isn't it part of our work to help them uncover the questions that says, what could be my limit? Now, normally we talk about financial limits because that's what most people worry about. Can I afford it?
Yes.
Right? Going back to the resistance to change, then you have to go back and link it to, for a lot of founders, technical founders especially, they come with their expertise around their knowledge of what they're building. When you're working in this space and you're at that level of starting to scale, going beyond, 5 figures to 6 figures a month, the biggest thing you've got to realize here is the mental switch to say, I am a technical founder, but you know what? Unless you've done it a number of times before, running a business is very different. Building a business is very different. And therefore, the limits are also trying to uncover and say, what internal limits have you placed on yourself? And that could be due to the knowledge you have, the people you've worked with, the people who are working with you, because it depends who you surround yourself with, right? And that's the other thing for scaling firms is their team and who they bring on board is really important. Because if you bring the wrong kind of person, then at that level, the impact is exponential.
You're absolutely right, yeah.
It's right. The right kind of person could give you exponential growth, but also the wrong person will give you exponential decrease in where you're trying to get to and start to decelerate your timelines of where you want to get success.
Yeah.
So I think the piece around that limits is an interesting discussion because you've got to be open to yourself, not to the people you're working with, and say, what do we know? And if we don't know enough, then that is a limit, right? About what you're trying to do.
Or thinking you know it all is a limit.
As we all do, right? Even me.
I know that. I very often talk to my clients and I say, yeah, you know it.
So after accountancy, I did an MBA, and this piece was learning new knowledge. I had to get something different to go away and do something different. And that's why I kind of, if I'd have stayed in accountancy, I had an offer actually, thinking back on it, maybe it was one of those inflection points. But I did, within, I think, 5 weeks of leaving EY, I had an offer to go and work for a very large American investment bank. But the one thing they said, and it was in their middle office, so who knows where I might have been, right? Very different career. And if in investment bank, the middle office is the bit between the trading arm and the back office functions. And the guy there was about 4 years older than me, really nice guy, lovely fellow, wanted me to go and work with him. And I turned him down stupidly. Now, you might say stupidly.
I was going to say, really?
The reason for me doing that, he said you had to do exams. And here I was, having done 3 lots of, GCSE, A levels, university, and then accountancy exams, 4, right? And not done very well at them. And therefore, my emotional state wasn't ready to say, I could do it. I'm sure I could do it. Because working in industry and doing accounting is much easier. As my good friend Vince Talent would tell you, right? So Vince has become very successful. But he was at the time, 18 months after graduating from university with me, same year, 18 months, he was a qualified accountant. Because he went to industry and took CIMA exams. And these guys wanted me to take CIMA exams. So, and my sister has recently, at the age of 50, just qualified as a qualified CIMA accountant.
I know, and it just goes to show it doesn't matter your age, does it? You can
the same sister who had my maths teacher, right? So she's done really well for herself. So well done to you. Anyway, but that was the emotional state I was in. So I went and I said, right, if I'm going to study and do exams, and I need to give it full time rather than what I've been doing, right? So everything I'd done before then was school, whatever. Now I was a bit older. So I did an MBA from university, and then I joined the technology revolution. So I came and married my recent experience, my new knowledge, and went to work in the field of systemizing accounting systems. So I stayed fairly relatable to some of the expertise I had. But when I worked for companies who were providing software to replace ledgers and handwritten kind of accounts. And for the next 12 years or so, I worked around those companies and then was into my next level of travel. So with thanks to Hugh, who coined the phrase, who's my ex-boss, he said, we had a great time traveling the world, selling the most boring software to the most boring people. Sorry, accountants. But it was a great journey. And it, you know, I did all sorts of things. I did the consulting side of things. I did project management. I did pre-sales, which is
so actually not boring at all. And they wouldn't have been either, would
no,
they? To be honest.
Fascinating stuff. We were transforming businesses and people. And I worked with, you know, commercial bodies. I worked for public sector, charities, government, telecoms companies, financial services firms, oil and gas. And I learned so much about those industries doing the work. I did some product management. So I actually helped develop the product. And I did sales and alliances. So I learned so many new things in those 12 years for about 4 companies and learned so much. It was my kind of grounding. But the next inflection point was I got headhunted. Sorry, no, tell a lie. I got made redundant.
Okay.
My company was taken over. Like many software companies, they put the money in the wrong place. So here's a lesson for you guys in SaaS world, right? You've got to keep an eye on what you're putting into your R&D and developing versus what you're getting at the other end. And technical founders and many SaaS companies will focus on the product rather than the company. And by the way, I remembered one of the stories last week. So it's a good segue. And it's pertinent to all SaaS companies and product companies. You go out and you create your product and you think it's the best product. And you are out selling a blue circle. And what happens is you go out and you go out and you go out, you try and find your first customer for the blue circle. Eventually you find someone who says, I love your blue circle. Yeah. But actually, can you do me a red circle? And you say, as a company with, you know, a product hasn't sold yet and someone's interested in buying it, of course, I'll do you a red circle, no problems, right? So what happens is the product you built has morphed and now you're selling a red circle and you've got one customer. And because that one customer likes you, talks about you to other friends, some of them may buy your red circle and you'll get 1 or 2 other customers. And then someone will come along and say, I love your red circle. Can you do me a red triangle? And suddenly you're pivoting again. You've still got to keep your blue circle running, which you created. You've got your red circle. Now you've got customers. So you've got to keep that going. And you've introduced a red triangle.
Yeah.
So what happens is that in the early stages, because you're after business and revenue, you are happy to provide things to people. But what you don't realize as a growing company, the technical debt and the organizational debt you're placing on your business, because you're having to keep multiple things running up at once. You try and cover it, right? You create a new platform, you create modules, you try and slice and dice it. But at the end of the day, in those early stages, you would have already created some things that are going to come back and maybe bite you, right? So because what happens is you go to a red triangle, then someone wanted an orange triangle. An orange triangle becomes an orange square, and the square becomes a rectangle, and so on, right? Before you know it, you've got loads of things.
Story, yeah.
And at the end of the day, what you should be doing is going back. Why were you in business in the first place? What did you do the company for? What were you trying to sell? What were you trying to solve? Who were the people you wanted to help with your solution? And it's really important in those early days and in that scaling phase that you turn away from trying to please everybody and go back and say, what do we want to be known for? To George's point about niching, right? We want to find those clients that will help deliver a strength to us in the early days. And the important thing is that when you've got these early customers, people sell and move on trying to find new customers. And actually, your early customers are so, so important. And why they're important is because you need to treat them not as a customer we've sold that we need to keep, but these are people who trusted you, and you will have built up some story and longevity and history and potentially case studies, and they'll speak on your behalf. They'll give you testimonials. So you've got to nurture these people, not only for that, but also because they are the ones who are going to help you develop and design your platform and product.
Mm.
You need to consolidate and say what's good. You need to make sure that you can give them what they need, support their needs, and develop it with them. So you need to go and treat your first set of customers beyond your 5 and 10 and pick the ones that you've got the greatest affinity and relationship with and use them to consolidate your platform and product and say, what would you like to have in there? Because you know what? When things go wrong, they will be more forgiving. They will want to work with you because they don't see themselves as your guinea pig. They are co-designing something that works for them as well.
Oh, that sounds pretty powerful. So we're coming towards the end of our time here. So
Yeah.
you've covered an awful lot of ground. The things that you've learned, you've demonstrated on your journey. Wow, what a journey you've been through. And it's not all been roses all the way through, but
No.
you've really taken it, embraced it as your own in that time when you were in corporate. And now you're taking it out to the world in your business. So what would be the key things that you would want to share that you've not perhaps covered so far with?
Too many to do in this, but I'll leave you with a couple of snippets. So other inflection points were that I got headhunted into IT services world after software. So I spent 12 years in software and I got headhunted into IT services. And I joined for a role. And I was told the day I was joining, go get your admin, get your kit, whatever, come and see me. My boss said, come and see me tomorrow in the office, main office in Canary Wharf. So I trotted off to Canary Wharf thinking, we're going to get introduced to a few people and here's my first couple of assignments. And my boss at that point turned around and said to me, while we were onboarding you and the process was going on, I've had a strategic rethink because I've been asked to do things differently by my boss globally. Now, this is a massive IT services firm. It had more than 100,000 employees and was one of the original Indian Big Four, a company called Satyam. And the two snippets about Satyam and my journey there was this first one. The first one, he says, I'm splitting my business into 4.
Yep.
Right. And I've decided I want you to look after 25% of the business. I'm giving you a chunk of the work I do across Europe. Now, I was joining a role that I thought was just me doing a thing supporting other parts of his business area. And the practice that we did was we were providing analytical, BI, data warehousing, data services and transformations to lots of clients across Europe, Middle East and Africa. It's a big chunk. And my job would have been to be the liaison between salespeople across EMEA and the work that this practice area did in providing those services and transformations. So the day I join, I'm like, I go home.
I've been promoted.
I've been hoodwinked, bushwhacked. What do I do? And I'd had 3 or 4 offers from other firms to do other things. And it was like, bugger. And I was, and excuse my French, shit scared, right? I had no context of what this was about. And to give you some idea of what it entailed, he says, here's a piece of paper. These are your targets for the year. Don't worry, you'll achieve it easily. I can't, and sign, and we can get on with the rest of it. So sign it. The target was $18 million of services business for the year.
Blimey.
Now, for maybe some people, that is probably, chicken feed, right? But for me, as a kind of having done this kind of role where I was not having such big targets, it was a massive jump. The biggest target I had before was 500K. So here's the thing, relative numbers are relative. So relatively, I was going from something within my reach and knowledge to something that was, my God, this is unattainable. The second thing, and I had only managed small groups of 2 or 3 people before this. So to give you a size of the idea of the size of the problem facing me to decide upon, he says, your team is brilliant. So what team? We have multiple teams running multiple programs and projects in 7 offshore delivery centers across India and locally in Europe.
Wow.
I said, how many people are we talking about? Well, it's not that many. It's a small team. Let me just check the numbers. Yeah, you've got 243 people, 25 contractors, and you've got a support team in finance and operations.
Crikey, massive.
right? So you can imagine my jaw dropped even further.
Yeah.
Although outwardly, supposedly I was calm, according to my boss when I talked back to him.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I went home and like, well, heebie-jeebies coming up. Now, I also spoke to a couple of friends. So the first lesson was there, don't jump to the bleeding obvious. Sometimes it is, you've got to look with a school of the bleeding obvious. But in this case, don't jump to the conclusion straight away, which is to run a mile. We've got this fight or flight thing.
Well, of course you do, because you get challenged, don't you, in such a big way.
Good point. Interesting. My wife said, hang on a minute, this is a chance for you to learn something completely new and give you skills you haven't got. And actually, you're going to be a leader. And to give the point, right? So, and another friend of mine, he says, you're working for an $8 billion a year company, and you're saying because of this one change, you want to go and work for a company that does, 20 million a year. Are you mad? He slapped me around the face and said, go back and be a man, type of thing. But so that was a really important lesson to say, had I not done it, so many avenues would have been closed off to me. And because of my own thinking about my own limitations, I would not have been challenged to learn, because I had to sink or swim. I didn't have an opportunity, had I not taken it, to kind of ease myself into it gradually. So that meant submersing myself into it in those first few weeks was, for me personally, very rewarding, but made my growth accelerate hugely.
And that sounds amazing, and a great spot to perhaps end on this one.
Last point, just for everyone else, right? It goes back to the point we made earlier. Sorry, Kim. It would be a great spot. The other thing was I had amazing people around me that I could turn to.
Yes.
So in your teams, wherever you are, someone somewhere in your business has probably got an answer to the problems you're facing. And sometimes, rather than looking without, we should look within. Because those people around me in operations, in finance, and my number two, Srini, helped me so much, immensely, to help me learn what I was doing, be the leader they needed me to be, and show that leadership and take them where they were going.
Brilliant. And I think that, that's even better to end on, is the fact that you've got the people around you who have the answers that you need, or at least the time to ask the right questions, because they know, and that's enough just to shift that thinking, isn't it?
For sure.
Oh, it's been a real joy talking to you today, Mahmood.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you so much.
Really,
and I am quite sure we'll be able to do another one in 12 months, and you'll have that much more to talk about as well. So
for all your people out there, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Kim and me, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Reach out if you need to.
So that is a point. I'll put your details in, but do you just want to say how people can best contact you? Is it email, website, phone? What's your preference?
At the moment, I'm in the process of redoing my website, so it's down, so you won't find me online. But LinkedIn has my contact details. It also has a Calendly link that you can click on to contact me and set up a 30-minute or 45-minute call. And my phone number and email is on my LinkedIn profile.
Excellent. Thank you, Mahmood. And to you, my listeners, thank you very much for those of you who've tuned in. Mahmood is a wealth of information. You've only seen part of it today. He's got an extensive history, and I've loved talking to him. And in fact, he's supported me on my own journey. Do reach out to him. I think a 30-minute call would be well worth your time. And in the meantime, thank you very much. And we'll wait till the next one. Thank you.
Bye-bye.